In this video, I want to talk about why speech errors occur. In order to do that, it will be useful to reference some historical models that have been proposed for how the process of articulation happens. I'm going to walk first through the model, and then after that I'm going to give an example of a particular sentence, the articulation of one sentence, so you can see how that might work. So the model begins first with message planning. This is the idea that you want to communicate. It's kind of nebulously formed pre-verbally. You want to communicate some thought, some idea, but you don't know the exact words you're going to choose in order to communicate that. Once that idea is planned, then you're going to go through a dual process of articulating a couple of different pieces of the puzzle at the same time. The first one that you see on the left is the lexical selection. So this is picking the lemmas. Now, lemmas are, as I've said before, the particular word parts that are in their most basic form. They're devoid of any kind of tense markers or plural markers. They're in present tense rather than being past tense. And so they're just like the most basic form of the word without any prefixes or suffixes or any other markers. So those are chosen, and at the same time, decisions about the syntactic structure of your sentence are going to begin to take shape. So the selection of your lemmas will be kind of like a list of words that you're going to employ in this sentence. And of course, at the same time, those are going to then feed into the bare bones structure of the kind of the skeleton sentence that you're beginning to form here. So you see those abbreviations NP and VP. That stands for noun phrase and verb phrase. And so in any given sentence, you might start with the subject and then a verb and then an object, like I go to the store. So I is the initial noun phrase, the verb is go to, and the store is the third box there. That's the noun phrase. So you would select the lemmas, the most basic forms of those words, and then kind of like fit them into the skeleton structure of a noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase. The next thing that's going to happen is you're going to take that basic structure of a sentence and assign lexical components by retrieving the word forms that are going to be needed in order to construct the particular sentence that you're making, whether that's future tense or past tense or present tense. You're going to have to not just rely on that lemma, but you're going to have to rely instead on a particular form of the word with its constituent parts, its markers, its tense markers, and things like that. You'll also select the word frames that are going to be employed. Now, the word frames refers to like the parts of speech. What's depicted here visually is a sentence tree. It used to be that people would, in younger grades in school, they would map out the structure of a sentence using these sentence trees, and they would kind of start with the noun phrase and break it down into its constituent parts. There might be like a pronoun and some adjective or something like that, and there would be a verb phrase, and that would be constructed of some adverb and verb and things like that. So it's the syntactical parts of those word frames. And what's going to be happening here is you're going to retrieve the particular words that are going to be used in this to construct this sentence, and then you're going to insert them into that word frame, that sentence tree kind of idea that's begun to take shape with all the individual parts of speech. After that occurs, then you'll create a sound representation. And then finally, you will articulate the sentence. You will verbalize it out loud. Now, of course, all of this sounds like it takes an eternity, because to explain it, it really takes a lot of cognitive effort. But everything that's going on here is happening immensely rapidly, at lightning speed. You can't even begin to understand how fast it is, because all of this stuff is going on in the background. Even like right now as I'm talking, all of this stuff is going on subconsciously in the background, outside of my awareness. But we know that it's happening because of the kinds of speech errors that occur. So you've been reading already about some of the different kinds of spoonerisms and slips of the tongue and inversions of words that can happen in the production of speech. And the reason that those things happen is because of all of this layers and layers of simultaneous and consecutive planning that's going on in the background. And we can probe what this process ends up looking like based on the errors that we're seeing in speech. So I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like, and then I'm going to give you some examples of the errors. So if I wanted to say something like, when I was growing up, I ate too many sweets, I would hope that, this is my end goal. That's why I've listed it down at the bottom. I want to articulate for you that idea. But the way that this begins is actually with a message plan up at the top. So this is just kind of like a nebulous idea. It's preverbal. I've chosen a picture to represent it because I don't have any words yet chosen. I just have this idea that I want to communicate about this chubby little boy who's eating too much dessert. The next phase of what's going on there is, like I said, you're going to choose the lemmas. That's the most basic form of the words. So in order to construct that sentence, I'm choosing when Jesse was, grow up, eat too many sweet. Those are the lemmas. Those are the most basic present tense forms of each of the words that I'm hoping to eventually employ. Now I take those and I kind of fit them into the skeleton structure of a sentence. So I'm going to start with kind of like an adverb and then a noun phrase, a verb phrase. So that's like when I was growing up, and then another noun phrase. The verb phrase is ate, and then the noun phrase is too many sweets. And of course, that can be further broken up, and I'll show you what that looks like in a sentence, or in a second. But you can see that so far we've just articulated this part here, and then next we've got to select this word frame. So we've got to get a little bit more particular about the structure of this skeleton sentence. So this would end up being something like an adverb and a pronoun, verb, another pronoun, verb, adverb, adjective, noun. Now I'm not sure I've got this right because I'm not good at diagramming sentences. I never really learned this process growing up, and I don't actually care that much about diagramming sentences. And so you just have to bear with me if you're really good at it and you recognize that I've made a mistake here. I don't care. The point isn't to get this precise. The point is that subconsciously your brain is doing this kind of mapping of understanding the different parts of speech and what's appropriate to construct a sentence. And then you're retrieving these words. So you're using like the list of words that I've put here, these lemmas, but you're concocting the precise form of those words. So you're taking like Jesse and you're switching that to the pronoun I, because I'm talking about myself. So Jesse is the base word, but because I'm talking about myself, I'm actually going to replace this concept of Jesse with I. And here I originally selected the lemma grow up, but I really need to switch this to growing up because this is the past tense intransitive verb form. And so at this point, I'm kind of recognizing that I've got to take these lemmas and twist them into some particular tense and particular verb form that can then fit into the overall sentence, even more complicated skeleton structure of my sentence. And then finally, like I've articulated over in this figure here, you can see that the next thing we do is we begin to represent the sounds. And how that works is like if I'm going to articulate the word when, then I activate the sounds w, e, n. And this right here is a schwa. It's an upside down E because it's just a generic vowel. It's very unparticular. So, but if you put these different sounds together, they activate the word when, and then you are able to articulate that word. So like I said, all of this stuff is happening in your brain so rapidly that it comes out in, very quick speech and it almost seems like there's no time for this to be happening. But again, we know it must be because of the kinds of errors that we see in speech production. So let's talk about a couple of those errors. One example would be if you wanted to say say the sentence, I hate having my bum pinched. You could often find somebody articulating a mixed up version of this sentence where they might say, I hate having my pinch bummed. That would be a very common type of error. Now, we have to recognize a couple of things about this type of error. This error involves a word exchange, but not of complete words. Only pinch, but not the ed that was supposed to be on pinch right here, got moved. That ed is left attached to bum. Errors like this, where a noun with an inflected past tense marker, like this ed here, or a plural marker like the letter S, will get moved, but they'll leave behind that stranded morpheme, and that's really common. You hardly ever get errors where, like, the inflected markers move by themselves, like if the ed was supposed to be here, and it would just move over. So the sentence would say, oh, that's a typo. I hate having my bummed pinch. That would rarely ever happen. Another kind of error that would rarely happen is, I hate having my pinched bum, where, like, the whole word pinched would swap its location. Instead, it's very common to leave the marker where it was supposed to be. Now, this provides a clue that the selection of the lemmas happens before they're slotted into a syntactic frame, that skeleton sentence we've been talking about, that carries the markers. So we've placed somewhere in this skeleton frame that ed ought to be there. Like, the ed needs to be to provide a past tense structure. And it stays there even though the lemma gets put in the wrong place. So pinch is supposed to be here, but ends up getting put here, but the ed stays here, which means that the syntactic frame is placed independently of the lemmas which have been chosen. Another thing that we can notice here is that the pronunciation of the past tense morpheme ed in bummed, right here, is pronounced differently than it would be here. It's adapting to the shape of the intruding stem. So what I mean by that is pinch has moved to this location and bum has moved to this location, and this intruding stem forces the ed to be pronounced differently. So in this sentence, in the original, you might say, I hate having my bum pinched. Notice that the ed at the end sounds much like a T. Pinched. It doesn't sound like a soft D sound. Pinched. But when you say it in the error, I hate having my pinch bummed, it sounds like a D. It's a soft D sound. So the articulation here of the ed is adapting to the erroneous intruding lemma. So bum ends up adapting the way that the ed is pronounced, and that means that the switch of these lemmas happened before the sound representation is created. So the swap happened here, and then the sound representation is created so that ed is pronounced as it should be if it were part of the word bum, rather than being like pronounced as a hard T, bumped. You can imagine that that would sound even more confusing, because if you adapted the pronunciation of the T, if you kept the pronunciation of the ed as a T sound, like it would be in pinched, then here it would sound like you're saying, I hate having my pinch bumped. A similar thing happens here in this sentence. You can imagine you want to say, I was on an eating marathon. And you might misspeak and say instead, I was on a meeting marathon, where the M becomes disconnected from marathon and joins the word eating, and so you end up saying meeting instead of eating. Okay, what we're seeing here is that the swap of the M had to have occurred before the article a or an was chosen and fully decided and placed into the skeleton sentence. Because if the sentence had been framed before the M was moved, then we would say instead, I was on an meeting Arathon. And because we didn't say that, and we almost never would say that, the fact that this this is the kind of adaptation we almost always see with these types of sound errors, this suggests that the sound swap must have occurred before the particular word forms of the articles were chosen and assigned to their word frames. So you can see that at this stage here, this is where the particular articles a and an will be chosen, which means that even though you would think that the M being mislocated would be a sound representation stage, that it would be just like in the production, in the articulation, somewhere around here, it actually had to have occurred far earlier, like somewhere in the retrieval of word forms stage, or in the lexical assignment stage, somewhere up above that sound swap had to have occurred, because this is the stage right here where we decide on using the article a or an. And so that suggests to us that the sound swap had to have already occurred earlier in the process, and that at this stage here, the article was correctly chosen to match the incorrect form of meeting rather than eating.